Hey guys, welcome back. We're continuing on with our revision today, and now I'm going to be doing Alexander III. This is my mind map. I might attach a picture, but let's move on. Okay, Alexander III ruled from 1881 to 1894. He came into power after the assassination of his father, Alexander II, by the people's will. So let's talk about some of the context behind Alexander III's rule. Well, first off, he comes into power after witnessing the brutal assassination of his father by the people's will, a very liberal group, and this shapes a very conservative, reactionary outlook of his. So he opposes liberalism and takes on a very oppressive role. And that is further exacerbated by his tutor, Pobedonostov, who is also the tutor of his son, Nicholas II. Pobedonostov was a Slavophile. He was the procurator of the Holy Synod, which was like a religious organization, sort of an amalgamation between the state and the church, and he was obviously very conservative, which shapes Alexander III's rule. Okay. He basically implements in Alexander III's mind the idea of autocracy, orthodoxy, and nationality as a slogan, which shapes or gives way to the 1881 Manifesto of Unshakable Autocracy, after which Abatza Milutin, if you remember, as a Minister of War under Alexander II, and Loris Melkov, the Minister of Interior, resign in protest. Okay, now let's move on to police repression. So police surveillance and repression was extremely prominent under Alexander III with, the secret police, or the Okhrana, which is what I believe it was known as at that time. You had the 1881 Exceptional Measure Statute, which basically increased surveillance and censorship. And then you had the 1882 Statute of Police Surveillance, which I think the name says it all. Right. Now let's move on to social reform. One of the most important social reforms was that Alexander III reintroduced the idea of the nobility being, there being some sort of social hierarchy. So the nobility was reintroduced in the form of land captains in 1889. In 1889, he introduces land captains, who are basically, chosen or handpicked from the nobility, and they're given the job of, taking care of local government. And they have the ability to override zemstvas, and they also have judicial powers within that, local form of government. And in 1890, the Zemstva Constitution gives 57% of gives 57% of places or seats to the nobility, to the land captains. So historian Charkes, Charques, historian Charkes states that this introduction of land captains undermined the tradition of self-governance and stirred the bitter resentment of the peasants. He also introduced this idea of semi-serfdom being reinstated because of these land captains, which actually was well reflected in the fears of the peasantry that there might be a reinstitution of serfdom, which, that gives you an idea of just how oppressive Alexander III's rule was. This can also be seen with the 1853 ban on leaving mirrors, which was later abolished. Right. Okay. Let's move on to another form of social reform that was Russification. Russification was this overarching process or reform, which basically it aimed to give the people a single identity. This is common to Alexander II, who tried to do the same thing by, more liberalism, but it is contrasted here because it's done in a very conservative, oppressive, violent manner, because Russification, it basically worked on this idea of the erasure of ethnic identity, which was a majority of the population. It attempted to erase 60% of the population of Russia, which was ethnic, which was of a different ethnicity. For instance, with like the oppression of revolts in Armenia, and all this really did was polarize people who already believed in the Tsar to not, right, because of this oppression of ethnic culture. There was also a rise in anti-Semitism. There were pogroms against Jewish people, 17,000 of whom were forcibly deported, and a lot of their rights were reduced. And interestingly, this actually drove a lot of Jewish people to revolution. For instance, Trotsky or Zinoviev, which come up later, and Lenin and Stalin. Okay, now let's talk about education under Alexander III. Well, he pretty much reversed everything that his father did, like from here to here. Okay, let's talk about him. Why is that? So, firstly, there was an increase in censorship, and the University Statute of Alexander II in 1863 was pretty much reversed, because now women were barred from lectures. Jewish people obviously could no longer attend lectures. There was the introduction of a quota system. People had to pay to go to classes, and it became very exclusive, so that only members of upper classes could receive a higher education. As a result, an 1897 census reveals that only 21% of Russian people were literate. Literate, not illiterate, literate. Okay, now let's talk about judicial reform. So there was the introduction of closed court sessions, which basically meant no press, no jury, just a ruling. Well, I don't know about jury, but no press, just a ruling, and no public. And then you had the altering of the electorate. So there was bias in elections. For instance, the weightage of the vote in St. Petersburg was reduced by 2/3. Okay, now finally let's talk about the economy. So under Alexander III, there were actually quite a few financial ministers. So he started off with Nikolai Bunge from 1881 to 87. Yes. So from 1881 to 1887, you had Nikolai Bunge. What did Bunge do? Well, he failed to balance budgeting and stabilize the ruble. He, however, introduced the peasant land banks in 82. Okay, sorry. He introduced the peasant land banks in 82, which basically gave loans to peasants. But basically, he kind of failed. And then came Vyshnegradsky. I think it was Igor, but Vyshnegradsky, who came obviously in 87 after Nikolai Bunge. Under him, grain exports increased by 18%, and they witnessed the first ever budget surplus in 1892. And they also got loans from the French in 1881. However, he believed staunchly in the idea that we must go hungry but export, his words, which led to the famine of 1891, with 2 million people dead, which resulted in him being sacked in 1892. Then in 1892 comes in the last, and I would argue the best, in terms of economy, finance minister, Sergei Witte, or Witte, however you would like to pronounce it. So he saw to the 1890s industrial boom in Russia. He, however, believed that the pressures that economic modernization put on the peasants was a necessary evil. So I don't know about humanitarianism with this guy, but economically he did perform, I'd say. If you look at it, he introduced a lot. So what he did, the best part, was he brought in, he increased taxes and, gave out loans, and that helped bring in currency. But the most important thing he did was bringing in foreign investment. How did he do that? He stabilized the ruble by putting it on the gold standard. What that did was it fixed the value so that there was transparency, so that international investors could go, oh, so that's how much we're going to be giving, and that's how much we're going to be getting. It was a real clear outline. So now they were ready to invest in Russian industry. And you had countries like France and Belgium investing, and that led to foreign capital increasing from 26% to 41% from 1890 to 1915. And it also brought in foreign expertise, with technical and managerial skill. At the time, 40% of the total industrial output was that of the textile industry, and 10% was of foodstuffs. Historian Gregory believed that the economy was, stable under Witte because he saw that the growth of the economy was greater than the growth of the population. So yeah, that has been Alexander III. Quite short compared to Alexander II. Hope that was helpful. All right, thanks again.